Thunder students, Mr. Williams back here, walking and talking you through our next subsection in Section 12, the Stagnant 1970s, the Carter years. So we're going to examine the years in our nation's history where President Jimmy Carter was at the helm of the executive branch. Now, Carter campaigned on a platform where he was going to bring the American presidency back to the people. Under LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and Richard Milhouse Nixon, and then continued by Ford, many people saw the presidency as an imperial-like position. The attitudes and the personas of LBJ and RMN gave way to the president almost being a strong authoritarian-like figure, okay, where only that person themselves could solve the problems that Americans were facing. Okay, it continued to grow and expand the position to be viewed as, this singular, all-empowered force when it came to the national government, good and bad. All right, good and bad there. Because of the corruption and the lies and the deceit, many Americans saw that as bad, okay, and rightfully so. So Jimmy Carter campaigns in 1976 as a man of the people. All righty. Now he's not necessarily the most personable. He's a bit distant in terms of he's extremely intellectual. Okay, so he doesn't necessarily use the same rhetoric, doesn't use the same, doesn't have the same attitudes as the average American per se. But he is still more connected to the people than some of his predecessors, and doesn't have the stain, all right, of government corruption and deceit that, unfortunately, Gerald R. Ford was associated with and the previous couple of presidents. He's definitely a more relaxed president, all right, this peanut farmer, this Navy veteran, this one-term governor of Georgia, the man from Plains. He does have a bit more of a simplistic, relaxed, casual approach, and this resonates through his staff in the White House as well. So he's all about changing the atmosphere in D.C. He doesn't say he's going to drain the swamp, okay? He doesn't definitely have the same attitude as the current president, but they both share a commonality in that they were both looking to change the norm, change the vibe and the atmosphere in Washington, D.C. to better serve the people of the United States of America and not necessarily serve the Beltway pundits, the politicians, the career politicians, and the individuals that made a lot of money because of the way the system worked for them, all right, in the District of Columbia. However, Carter, like Ford, is going to inherit some enormous problems, okay? And to an extent, the presidency that is inherited by Carter, it's a really difficult situation, not an unwinnable situation in terms of, potentially getting reelected. And we'll talk about that. But, man, it's tough, all right? Especially when you consider the first problem being the economic recession that had settled into the United States of America. This new phenomena of stagflation was really, really making things difficult for big businesses and the average American worker. We talked about it in the previous subsection. There were some procedural items that were uncovered because of the Arab oil embargo of 1973. So some aspects of our American industrial complex and economy that were not changing fast enough, or we were not forecasting for, that ultimately caused our economy to slide into that recessive state. And there was just not necessarily adequate response, okay, from top to bottom, from private to public life to accommodate for the inflation that was taking place, for the unemployment that was rising, for the interest rates. A lot of the backbone industries, okay, manufacturing sectors, close up shop, all right? Main Street America is in turn affected, all right, and has to board up their stores just because, for the most part, cost to doing business increased substantially as a lot of this hinges on the elevated fuel prices and the fact that our marketplace, our economy, wasn't able to adjust fast enough to the new reality of fuel not being super readily abundant and available and not being ridiculously cheap. Jimmy Carter is going to propose a few pieces of policy that are effectively going to kind of get things going in the right direction to revitalize our struggling economy, but he's ultimately not going to be able to see it come to fruition in the early 1980s. There was no guarantee that his continued leadership and guidance in Congress in the early 1980s were going to continue to push for policy that was going to cause for a turn in our economy. But he is going to ultimately look to deregulate some sectors of the economy, cut some spending in the areas of government, and provide some tax relief. All of that, looking to alleviate some of the stress given by inflation, things costing more, unemployment, people not being able to work, so having to cut into their savings. They're having to take advantage of some government programs. They're not being able to spend money because they don't have it because they can't work. And then interest rates, which increased greatly. Americans were discouraged to spend, but this needed to happen as well to try to generate a certain level of flow to take care of the ever-increasing number of unemployment claims. But nevertheless, difficult financial situation that our nation experiences. Jimmy Carter is the one that inherits this. Does he have an extreme level of success in the 4 years that he's president? No, but he does lay some groundwork that Ronald Reagan is going to be able to take and run with and see a relatively rapid turn for the better regarding the American economy and the situation from top to bottom. Okay, top to bottom. Let me take my hands gesture right there in regards to people being successful again financially. A couple of other problems that Carter is going to inherit. The Cold War, this state of détente, peaceful coexistence, it's not going to be maintained, okay? So Carter represents a bit of a gentler president when it comes to foreign policy, and the Soviets are going to look to take advantage of this, where Nixon was cunning, shrewd, all about working out negotiations and kind of using leverage and relationships with other nations to keep the Soviets in check. Jimmy Carter, not so much, okay? Again, not a great deal of foreign policy experience. He was all about diplomacy, okay? So the olive branch, per se, playing nice, and that's just not how you work with the Soviets, okay? They are still looking to expand. They're still looking to, flex their muscle and force their will upon other neighboring nations. They're going to go ahead and they're going to invade Afghanistan in an effort to, again, kind of stress and strain relationships with weaker nations in the Middle East and throughout Asia. They're going to invade Afghanistan in the late 1970s. Jimmy Carter is going to place some embargoes on the Soviets. He's going to boycott the attendance of the United States of America to the Summer Olympics in Moscow in 1980. But ultimately, Jimmy Carter's foreign policy status with the Soviets is one of weakness. It's perceived as, kind of just going with the flow. We're not operating from a position of power and influence anymore. We're more reactionary to the Soviets. We're not trying to prevent things. The Soviets take advantage of this, okay, knowing that their economy is struggling, knowing that Carter's efforts and desires are elsewhere, hence the invasion of Afghanistan and hence the constant meddling that is maintained in that hemisphere. Just not a good situation. Another problem, again, I guess the problem would have been the elevated hostility and angst of the Soviet Union in the mid to late 1970s. And because of Carter's, weaknesses in regards to foreign policy or a desire to utilize, military strength, the Soviets are going to take advantage of this, and it's going to be an issue going forward into the early 1980s. This is a video in the Google Slides. You can watch this. This is a background on the Soviet-Afghani situation. Recommend you checking it out. Any Idle, good stuff there. But moving on. Crisis situations are also going to haunt Jimmy Carter. He does have a phenomenal success when it comes to foreign policy. He is actually going to negotiate a peace between the Egyptians and the Israelis. So one of those Arab nations that historically had always been looking to conquer and wipe Israel off the map, Jimmy Carter is going to broker a peace between those two religiously, culturally feuding nations. They're known as the Camp David Peace Accords. He basically gets the leadership of Israel and Egypt to sit down with him in the United States of America in 1978 and then negotiate a peace. This is a huge step, okay? Probably it's given necessary credit by historians and by present media when talking about presidential politics. But it is kind of the initial step to get other Middle Eastern nations to start playing nice with Israel, because Egypt at this time is a big-time player in regards to the relationship of other Arab nations with Israel and amongst themselves in the Middle East. So it's a big deal for this to be achieved. But the general weaknesses and lack of foresight by Jimmy Carter in regards to foreign policy is going to cause probably the most damning event during his time as president, and essentially guarantees he's not going to be reelected in 1980. And that's the Iranian hostage crisis of 1979. It leads into 1980. The Iranian Revolution. A lot of backstory here. We've got a couple of slides to follow this one that provides some videos. Watch those. The Ayatollah Khomeini, he's back. They run out the Shah. For lack of a better term, the people of Iran are upset with their governing structure. They run the monarch out of town, a monarch that we had been supporting and had a good relationship with. So the Iranians, not hot on the United States of America because they see us as being a primary culprit, okay, and propping up the Shah and keeping him in power when he was being oppressive to his citizens. They've also got a bit of a revolution, all right, the Arab Spring of the late 1970s there, and they want to embed their general majority interpretation of Islam into their governing structure. So they're going to take their religion and mix it with government, and ta-da, you have the Ayatollah Khomeini. His leadership in the new governing structure in Iran in 1979, looking to run the Americans out. There's actually a running of the American embassy by Iranian students, okay, revolutionaries. And they're going to hold hostages. So we have Iranian students converging on the embassy, taking the embassy and holding individuals hostage, looking for us to return the Shah to Iran so he could be held for the crimes that he committed against Iran. Not a good situation here. So naturally, you should think, wait a second. The United States of America has their foreign dignitaries held hostage. Our embassy is overrun by Iran, and we just sit on our hands? Yes. Effectively, that's the approach of Jimmy Carter. He says, hey, let the hostages go. Let's work this out. And ultimately, nothing happens. It's a humiliating experience. Americans are already exhausted with the way their government's been behaving. They're exhausted with the economic distress. And this exhaustion is now well over a decade in length, okay? Because it goes back to the mid-'60s when a lot of social and political strife started to, boil over. And now we've got this situation internationally where we just look powerless. We look weak. We let a bunch of Iranian revolutionaries storm our embassy and hold American citizens and others hostage for 444 days. There were some efforts by Jimmy Carter to try to negotiate a releasing of these hostages. None of them actually bore any fruit, okay? And there was also a secret attempt to extract these hostages from Iran, secret military operation, and it ends in unfortunate tragedy and disaster. But nevertheless, this was a big black eye on the United States of America, or egg on the face, okay? So this is kind of like Dwight's U-2 spy plane incident. This is kind of like JFK's Bay of Pigs, okay? But it was held to a different level in the American psyche because these are American citizens abroad held hostage. And what are we doing about it? What are we doing about it? So it just adds to that sentiment that had been growing and growing and growing across the American public of just how good are we? What's it really mean and or matter to be an American? What does this status of our nation on the international stage, gosh, it just sucks to me, an American right now. And the US of A just stinks as well. Good little video here documenting the Iranian Revolution and hostage crisis. Again, it's got a bit more of an apologetic lean to the Ayatollah Khomeini and to some of the Iranians. Not a super huge fan of that, but it does give you some important dates and some important events that transpire throughout the entire crisis. Carter's demeanor in all of this is just one where it kind of makes our nation again look weak and look like a bit of a paper tiger, where economically speaking, we're in a bit of a doldrum stage, right? We're still in a recession. Things aren't going, okay? The overall vibe, the level of patriotism, super low in the US of A. And to top it all off, he gives his legendary "A Crisis in Confidence" speech. And he's trying to do good here. And again, this is on the Google Slides. Watch this, okay? He's trying to do good here. But ultimately, he comes off as, again, kind of whiny, condescending, and almost kind of blaming Americans for the situation that we're currently in, which he's not wrong, okay? He's not wrong, but man, as a president, you really don't go, hey, it's all your fault, but gosh darn it, let's jump on the wagon and let's make this better. Just kind of really tone deaf, engaging the situation and trying to realize how to speak to Americans when he's getting ready to, try to be reelected in 1980. So the Crisis in Confidence speech, relatively accurate assessment of how we are in the predicament we are in domestically and abroad. But in terms of trying to use this setting to set himself up for re-election in 1980, really misses the boat with that. And that does it with our look at the Carter years. Lots of information here. A lot going on. I could take another 15, 20 minutes to walk and talk you through it, but for sake of time, we're going to close this subsection out, and we'll begin with our next subsection, the presidential election of 1980. Okay? So, that's all I got here, ladies and gentlemen.